Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to BioStrategy Partners Practical Knowledge Series, our first panel of January 2021, or rather our first panel of 2021. We have a fantastic panel for those of you today thinking about starting a life sciences business and those of you who work with such individuals. So we're very pleased to have an expert panel to share with you what they know about the things you should be thinking about as you consider taking this important step. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our sponsors. We have several longstanding supporters of the Practical Knowledge Series: MVM Associates, Cesar Revis, Intellectual Property Law, and University Place Associates. So we always are grateful for their support, and we hope that as the opportunity arises, that you will consider supporting their organizations. I'm Michele Washko, the Executive Director of BioStrategy Partners. I will turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. I couldn't do them justice, so we're going to ask them to do that themselves.
Great. Thank you, Michele, so much, and welcome, everyone. I see people are still joining, so I couldn't be happier to be on this panel. So my background is, up until recently, I worked as a director for business incubation and accelerator programs at the University City Science Center. I always joke that I win the longest title, but what it meant was actually that I oversaw our proof of concept QED program that works with 22 participating universities in 3 states and help researchers like you commercialize their technologies. So I will talk a little bit about this program later on. And before that, I spent 5 years at the University of Pennsylvania Penn Center for Innovation, specifically at PCI Ventures, helping to start 19 companies out of the research there. And I also started and ran their accelerator called AppAdapt. So that's my background. I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to this panel.
Chris?
Hi, everyone. Chris Novak. I'm a managing director at CoView Capital, a investment bank. I specialize in healthcare, the whole spectrum of it, whether it's biopharma, services, equipment, or life sciences. Have been in banking for about 20 years, and a significant portion of our practice is raising capital for companies, whether they're relatively early stage, clinical stage, or out in the market.
Thank you, Chris. And Mark, please.
So welcome, everybody. My name is Mark Lane. I head a center at a CRO known as the Center for Global Drug Development. For those of you that don't know, a CRO is a contract research organization. We provide a number of different services in addition to clinical trial execution, which is what maybe people think mostly of CROs. I spent a few years as a tenure track scientist at the NIH, National Institute on Aging. Before going to industry, I've been at a number of different pharmaceutical companies as a product developer, leading product development teams or leading groups of product development teams. So I've got a lot of experience and like to think of myself as a drug and product development expert, and that's really what I've been doing. And that's what the Center for Drug Development helps our clients with at PRA. And I have been involved with a couple of startups as well. One that was successfully licensed a few years ago, and another that I'm working with now out of the Penn State Startup Leadership Network, which is a technology coming out of Hershey. So the topic of today is something that I think a lot about in my job at PRA, as well as in helping other companies.
Again, the topic for today is if you're thinking about starting a life sciences company, this is a fantastic place to start the new year. And we thought we'd start with talking a little bit about what constitutes a business plan today. What are investors and other stakeholders looking for with respect to a business plan? And I'm going to ask Chris to kick this one off for us. So what do investors look for? What's the format that is most popular, most appreciated these days?
That's a bit in flux in terms of format. It used to be that you would share, maybe a 60 or 80 page document in Word that was very lengthy in prose. I don't know that people have attention for that anymore, or maybe people have just accepted that no one was actually reading those things in depth. So they started transitioning towards PowerPoint presentations as often as they are any sort of lengthy or written document. I find that for the entrepreneur working in Word so that they can get their full, more robust thoughts down on paper and then synthesizing it into a PowerPoint presentation or a more executive format of a Word document really helps in developing their business plan. So you can, spit out everything that you think you have to say on a topic and then try to distill that into something that's, both understandable to someone who hasn't been exposed to your business and your concepts before, but doesn't overwhelm them with concepts that, can be, kind of filled in later. On the whole, if you're developing a presentation or a Word document to share with potential investors, something on the order of 10 to 20 pages is probably going to be about right. Putting your thumb on the scale towards the smaller end of things, because if you can do that, then hopefully you're conveying a lot of the important information to people in a very succinct, easy to understand way. Doing that, avoid, using really complicated sentences where you try to cram a lot in and it becomes a bit ambiguous and a bit of a riddle for people to figure out. It should be in fairly plain language as much as possible. And in terms of what investors look for in a business plan, I think it's always best to step back and look at it from a big picture. They want to know before they give you money, do you know what you're in for? Do you know what this business needs to look like and all the elements that go in towards getting to your destination? Do you understand how heavy of a lift this is? Have you been there before and done that? Are you experienced with that? Because that helps a lot. But aside from that, have you thought through the steps that are going to be involved in getting this business up and running, and then come up with specifics as much as you're able to address all of the obstacles and critical paths that you're going to have to follow to get there, whether that's getting through clinical trials, whether that's through finding a manufacturer, understanding what kind of salaries you're going to have to pay and what kind of talent you're going to need, how this thing is going to be sold and distributed. All the elements of what eventually is going to be your successful business. You need to convince someone that you've thought through how to get there and you have more than just the gist of it, but you have a good approximation based on some evidence.
Yeah, can I jump in a little bit? Because Chris is absolutely right, but if we sort of separate the very first pitch to investors, which usually is programs that give grants or seed investment versus later on when you go for Series A, I would, at that point, you probably don't even know whom you need to hire later on. So I would emphasize just a couple things. One is you are pitching to a team of people. Some of them will understand your science, some of them will not. So bring the story to these people. What is the problem you're trying to solve, and how does it affect the potential customer, whether it's a patient or maybe a doctor or maybe an institution like a hospital. So taking these people on a journey of the story and telling them exactly what is the pain point that you're trying to fix will get them engaged right away, because the decision will be collective and you will always have opportunity to go deeper into science. But I think the first element is to get them hooked up on sort of emotional and intellectual level to tell what is the story, what is the problem that you're solving. And I always say fall in love with the problem, because then you can test different solutions. And another thing I want to point, a lot of people come in with a breakthrough research, which is really interesting, but they claim that they have no competition. I just want to emphasize you always have competition. And if this is a breakthrough, the competition is the way it's done today, the way the problem is solved today. So I think, and Chris maybe will back me up on that, I think it's a red to come in to the pitch presentation and you say you have no competition. So these are just my 2 comments. And then I jotted down, what you need in your first pitch deck, what kind of first 10 slides you need. And I don't know if you want me to maybe quickly run through them. because that would be the first sort of test of your future business plan. If you can put those 10 slides together and then have your more of a scientific backup slides, I think you would be in a good shape. And so the first slide would be the problem you're solving, and then the second slide, the solution, the technology that you have, then the supporting data that goes with that technology, then what is the market size and the competition, and then clinical pathway, what kind of clinical trials maybe you need, where are you in that pathway, where is your IP, obviously is very important, the team that you're assembling, and then where the funds that you're asking for will go. So have your ask, but also understand how you're going to spend that money. So, and then the thank you slide. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, Karina is absolutely right on all of those fronts. I love that framework for the slides, and that's typically where we end up, and it nudges here and there depending on the specific company and opportunity. But going back to what she said about developing a story, that's exactly right, and that's exactly how I frame that for my clients and the companies that I'm on the board of, is to always be thinking of this as a story, and is your story cohesive? Does it make sense? If someone asks a question about your company, about the universe you're in, does your story, have gaps missing where you can't answer things, or is it, a fully collected thought? One thing that I would add that's helpful when it comes to describing the market opportunity, both, what your solution provides versus, what's out there already in the universe, or whatever the standard of care is. Like she said, there's always competition. Keep in mind, we were talking about wound care before this panel started. Wound care is notoriously difficult to get through clinicals because it's compared to the standard of care of regular dressing changes and cleaning of the wound, which a lot of patients don't often get, and companies find it incredibly difficult to prove meaningful benefit for their technology above that simple standard of care. So that's, your competition in that area. It's okay if your competition is low tech or no tech. It's there, and it's what people are doing. So that's something to keep in mind on that front.
Yeah, and if I wanted to expand on a couple points just so we don't leave these as we think about the story. You really need to make sure you understand your solution and where it fits. And we've said that, but I think it's worth emphasizing. I've talked to companies before that say, I've got this great enzyme inhibitor, whatever it is, and it's going to work in cancer, and it's going to work in diabetes, and it's going to work in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the market for our product is, billions upon billions of dollars. Your science, and you really need to look at where the unmet need is and where you best fit. Having done some in-licensing work as well in pharma companies, you may end up with a very large potential market, but you really have to refine down and focus certainly your initial approach. And a lot of the companies may not be interested in all of those different potential diseases and indications. They may not have the sales force, they may not have the wherewithal, but they will most likely be interested in tying up the technology from a competitive point of view. So, really, what is your market, and make sure you're defining your market, particularly your going in position as part of the story. And then we didn't mention the word, I don't think, but I think it was implied, how you differentiate from the competition, differentiation. How are you more efficacious, safer, more convenient, less costly? What is it that makes your particular approach different from that competition that's out there? And carefully defining your competition as well. It's not just your particular molecular pathway, or what is it? It's the disease, it's the treatment. As Chris mentioned, wound care, that's a good example. The standard of care for early stage wounds is clean it, dress it, and stay off of it, right? That's part of your competition. But if you look in wound care, if any of you are familiar with that, and there's other areas as well, there's multiple products trying to take very different approaches there. So what is your competition? And generally, I think it's broader than many people think. So you have to look carefully at the competitive landscape as well.
And just adding to what Mark said, which I absolutely agree with across the board, is, once you move away from the biopharm space towards anything else in life sciences, especially, there is an understanding that you may have developed something that's technically interesting and that maybe solves a problem, but there's always the risk of when it comes to commercialization that people are happy to see you've done something, but they're not willing to pay for it, or who's going to pay for it, or they're not really interested in using it. It solves a problem that exists, but that people aren't willing to adopt your solution for reasons X, Y, and Z, and you don't necessarily know, what those reasons might be, unless you go out and talk to people who would be your potential customers, or second to that, your potential users, differentiating the payer from the caregiver. So having those conversations early on, people who can give you feedback and confirm that there is a market and a need for something that does specifically whatever your device or service would supply, is a crucial thing to be able to share with potential investors and for yourself to understand.
Yeah,
go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, just very quickly, and we talked about this when we talked earlier, right? You don't want to be a solution that's looking for a problem, and that's very easy to do. To have very great science, real innovation in studying something, but if there's not an unmet need in the market, it probably won't go very far.
Yeah, I just want to quickly add, and we will talk later on about different resources, but that customer discovery that Chris was talking about becomes really important. And, ICOR programs, for example, focus just on that. Who is your customer, and is that customer who is going to be the payer? Because it's not necessarily so. And just anecdotally, just to give you an idea how important that program might be, we had a company that thought that they would provide solutions to oncologists, but going through the ICOR, they discovered that it's not oncologists, it's radiologists that would be their customers. So those subtleties are important when you're figuring out who to sell to.
Karina, would you mind explaining for our audience? I'm not sure that everyone will be aware of what ICOR is. Could you just spend a moment talking about that?
Yes, ICOR is actually an NSF supported program. And if you Google it, you will find it that a lot of universities offer it, and there are also standalone ICOR programs. And it's basically, you can join the program, and it focuses you on just that, customer discovery. It's for very, very early stage, it's ideation stage technologies. You need to have a team, I think, of at least 2 to go through it. But basically what they're going to do, they will bring you mentors, they will bring you speakers, but they will send you on a journey where every week you have to interview multiple potential customers to get their feedback and align with your story that you're developing. And by the end of that program, you will have a pitch deck, and you will have a good understanding who your customer is.
Mark, maybe you can elaborate a little bit here. You have great depth of expertise in product development. Can you talk maybe a bit about that particular part of the journey, and maybe start us off by talking about how it is that you arrive at maybe your minimally viable product, or how you take a platform technology and start to really refine the appropriate market for that?
Yeah, there's a couple things I could say there that I hope would be helpful, but I wanted to say, I guess it's pretty directly related to what we've been talking about, but I had the thought to make sure to mention that this defining your market can be somewhat nuanced as well. If I think about chronic diseases, for example, in the pharmaceutical industry, with established standards of care, established treatment guidelines that physicians might do need to follow. And what I've seen on several occasions where someone come up with something that is probably innovative, I'm speaking carefully because I don't want to give anything away that could have been confidential, and I don't think it is. I've worked with a client before who was, looking to really change a treatment paradigm based on the measure of something in the serum. And when they really, and then they would, based on that measure, would direct a therapy at that patient. But as they looked further, what they found was physicians don't typically measure that particular parameter. There's already established treatment guidelines, and changing those guidelines can be very challenging. There's a lot of education that needs to occur, not only of physicians, patients, payers, et cetera. So there can be, just little nuances that about things like treatment guidelines or what gets measured in a particular physician's office that could have a significant impact on your probability of success. So that's where getting out and talking to people, I think, is helpful. And then I don't know if this is where we were leading, but the idea I had is that, and I don't want to overcomplicate this, but I always recommend that you have something that we call a target product profile. And if you look that up online, you'll see anything from something very rudimentary to the FDA, the U.S. regulatory body, has a multiple page guidance on what that should be. But for me, the target product profile at the early stage is really, and this is just how to think about your product, is really very basic, right? Is how do you see your product? Well, you start with the vision. What is the vision for this product? Is it going to be the first in class, the best in class? Is it a second line treatment, a first line treatment? How is it going to be dosed ultimately in the marketplace? All right, you need to pay attention to that. You don't want to have a product that needs to be administered intravenously when the rest of the market is actually your competitive set is either oral or subcutaneous self-injection in the patient's home. Right, so you really have to think through what the ultimate product might look like. Again, I mentioned how does it differentiate from the competition, any kind of claims you might need to make. And then what I really wanted to talk about, and we can get into it in more depth, is at that stage you need to ask yourself, what are the critical unanswered questions that I have both clinically and scientifically? And that might be route of administration. Is it bioavailable by a different route of administration? It could be what is the dose. It could be does it engage the particular molecular target? Depending on your stage of development, those questions will evolve. But we're going to get into talking about your roadmap of sorts of taking the product through development. You need to start with that rudimentary target product profile and really critically think through what are the critical questions that I must answer, because that really drives your experiments, right? Does that address what you were thinking for the moment?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
I just want to quickly add that you don't have to do it alone, right? So starting a company means starting a team and bringing in the right expertise. And I know we will be talking about the importance of finding the right CEO, but the right CEO can actually navigate all of this and leave you focusing on science and that contribution to the company.
Speaking of roadmaps, can you talk, Chris, maybe a little bit about how to think about the financing roadmap? Obviously, with your work, you're doing very often later stage financings, but certainly you have some experience and expertise in the early stages as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you're right. As an investment bank, we typically get involved somewhere beyond the seed stage. But for people looking for the first, kind of smaller rounds of capital to help them launch and take on the early steps of assembling the team and developing the business, when you're talking something in the low single-digit millions or all the way up through maybe 10 million. One thing I've found is a lot of the institutional healthcare funds that used to participate in that space have pulled back as dollar amounts have increased to these funds. They've grown and grown over, especially the last decade, and there just isn't enough opportunity for them to deploy capital in an early stage company, most early stage companies that are, at the very beginnings of their journey. So you now have to kind of scramble among an ecosystem that isn't as formal or necessarily robust, but there are a lot of players who will take an interest in a company that might just be a concept. As long as you address all of the things we've already talked about when it came to developing your business plan and what your story is for your, product, device, service, solution. If you can come in with good answers and a good presentation to get their attention and address their questions, there are individuals, there are endowments, there are quasi-government sponsored funds, and there are even funds that are in the healthcare space that have smaller capital allocation or less committed pools of capital that definitely look at seed stage opportunities, things that are pre-A round is what we're talking about here. And the key there really is networking. The more involved you are in the community of people who are in early stage life sciences and healthcare, the more likely you are to hear about opportunities to pitch someone who is trying to find strong opportunities to invest in. And also increases the chance that one of those people will hear about you and maybe come knocking at your door. But it's definitely a game of almost hide and seek. There's small pockets of cash. When I say small, from an individual, maybe hundreds of thousands, from private or public funds, maybe millions that they have, tens of millions. But there's no great coordinated catalog of all of these potential funding sources. So as you go out and try to, again, build your network for operational reasons, for planning reasons, for development reasons, these people can also be a good resource for you when it comes to opportunities to find funding. In the very early days, the friends and family rounds are very much still a real thing, even in life sciences, even with the giant checks that are going to be needed to build the business down the road. It has to start somewhere. It has to start with the ability to start assembling all of the elements that are going to be needed to make a viable push to take those first steps. And so it's definitely a hunt. And I've been on the board of several companies specifically to try to add resources for them to go out to and raise additional capital from investors with deeper pockets, again, individuals or smaller funds, with raises that are below what we would take on professionally. But this is important, and it's an ecosystem that I find is often neglected, and often a place where entrepreneurs can struggle for a long time because there is no real rhyme or reason. You might hear from some individuals that they would never invest in a business that has characteristics X, Y, and Z that you have in your business plan. But the next 7 investors might love that element, and so how do you separate the signal from the noise when you're talking to what comes down to often just individual people? It's a tough, confusing field without a strong roadmap as to what doors to knock on. But the more allies you get on your side, the more helpful you'll find those people can be as you build that network. And as they germinate and you start to kind of pair them together and reach out to them and keep them updated and ask them questions. Asking them for something is a great way to build that relationship. And I think you'll find that opportunity, sometimes just kind of presents itself as long as you're out there and trying to, keep turning over stones.
I want to add that in addition to what Chris said, obviously very, very early stage technologies are usually looking first for non-dilutive funding, right? So SBIR, STTR grants are usually the way to go as the first step. Programs like QED at the Science Center. We here in Philadelphia region have a very robust angel network, and so I would definitely recommend looking at angel networks, but also looking at investors like Ben Franklin Technology Partners, who are usually the first in. But what I just want to say is you're going to get there but you have to practice your pitch, right? And the more you practice, the better it gets. And so just jumping on any opportunity to pitch, to talk to people, opening up the network is the key here.
Michele, if I could, at the right time, maybe this isn't it. I realize I missed my cue to go a little bit more in depth on one of the topics we wanted to cover. So
That's okay. Why don't we hold that for just one moment? I do have one question from the audience. Peter asks, and he directs this to Chris, but I think that all of you could contribute to this one. He asks, what distinguishes the timing, or what, how does the timing for non-dilutive versus dilutive funding, how does that work? And do you have any particular recommendations about inflection points that would sort of help draw that line, if indeed there is one?
Chris, do you want to
think
jump?
I'm sorry, Chris, I think he asked you to take a stab at that one, and then maybe we could go around the table.
When it comes to non-dilutive funding, I think that's something that's always on the table, potentially from the get-go. And honestly, even if you're a little early for some sources of potential non-dilutive funding, it doesn't hurt to understand what you might want to be building towards in order to circle back and pursue that in the future. I didn't address specifically all the different areas of funding that a relatively early stage company might pursue, beyond high net worths, beyond, certain types of healthcare funds. Yeah, angel networks are fantastic and crucial. There are state funds there are federal grants. I found the people at the NIH to be very happy to jump, especially lately on Zoom calls and have discussions about what exactly they're looking for. And who you should be talking to better understand what kind of grant opportunities there might be for a life science company like you. So I find that as companies get larger and larger, they depend less on the non-dilutive sources of funding, but there's no real space where it's too early to start having these discussions. I find there are grants all along the spectrum.
And getting a grant, sorry, I just want to add that getting a grant, non-dilutive grant, is a great validation, right? And it would be easier than to fundraise. And Chris, please back me up or not on that. That I think as you get through market validation, getting an NIH or NSF grant or BARDA grant gives you that validation and attracts more investors. I don't know, Chris,
Exactly.
if you want to say that. Mm-hmm.
Yep, 100%. Or even having the discussions and laying out that you understand the ecosystem for grants and other types of non-dilutive funding is a strong signal that you know what you're doing and that you have a plan.
Mark, anything to add on fundraising, and then we can launch into some more discussion about the product development journey.
Right, I think what I would add, and from my experience trying to help a couple of companies, and we've already touched on this, but just from direct experience, it is challenging. You have to knock on a lot of doors. You have to talk to a lot of people before you get to a place where someone's willing to come in and fund. And Chris, you didn't necessarily, I don't recall you commenting on this, but often you may need to build a little consortium of folks to fund your research, particularly in you get to a clinical stage where there's a lot of funding that's required. What I've seen is people have great interest in the technology. They think it's something that could go forward, but they're either unable or not willing at a certain stage to try and fund it on their own. So they'd like to see other groups come in and fund it as well. So you have to be open to all kinds of possibilities and knock on a lot of doors, talk to a lot of people to get success.
Yep, absolutely true. It's relatively the exception anymore that one person or group will underwrite your entire round. Even among the larger funds, they like the validation and comfort and having at least one or two peers. And as an early stage company, it's really going to feel much more like a mosaic of funding sources.
Great, thank you.
Let me just circle back for a minute to product development.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I apologize for missing my cue to weigh in a little more. So I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I think one thing to really think about at the right time, right? But particularly for your business plan and when you're talking to potential investors, you really need to understand what it takes to get this product to the market. And that goes well beyond the science that, whatever your innovative science is, and I'm sure all of those on the phone are really smart people and understand the science. But there's a point in time where it is no longer a science experiment. It is then a product development exercise. And so understanding, Chris alluded to this earlier, what is the manufacturing strategy? You don't need to have great detail here, but you need to understand what it will take to manufacture and get this into the marketplace. What are the clinical trials that need to occur? What preclinical studies need to be done to satisfy regulatory agencies to allow you to go into the clinic? Do you need to seek regulatory advice, for example, formal regulatory advice? And I would recommend that for just about everybody, seeking formal advice and agreement from the regulatory agencies in the regions that you anticipate marketing. And this would even be if you're licensing this product, right? Because part of that validation for a potential partner, let's say you want to eventually license to a pharmaceutical company, they're going to want to see that you understand all of these things and you've done your homework as well. They will be interested in the science, but they also want to know that you've understood the challenges to get it to the marketplace. And if by chance you're doing that on your own at some point, another thing that I see quite a bit is people not thinking about how all of those pieces I mentioned, clinical, manufacturing, preclinical, regulatory, how all those pieces need to come together. They're not done in isolation. They're usually interdependent. For example, you need to have a certain scale of manufacturing of drug product in order to do preclinical studies. But at that stage, you already need to be thinking ahead or working with a contract or research organization to how you're going to manufacture your initial clinical stage and where you're going to do that, how long is it going to take, because time is always of the essence, right? So you want to make sure that the timing is right. You have your drug available when you're ready to go into patients. You have your regulatory feedback in advance of your clinical trial. So you're able, and when you're able and when you have the right data, you can move into a patient study. So these things need to happen relatively seamlessly and certainly in an integrated fashion. So it goes much further than the science and beyond just even the clinical aspects. There's all of these other things that really need to be considered, and they're very much intertwined and interdependent. So that's what I wanted to say, Michele.
Appreciate that. Let's elaborate on that a little bit. And we've alluded earlier to finding the right CEO, but I think what you described there is the need to find the right talent at the right time. I wonder if we as a group could speak a little bit about how to go about that.
Can I take that on? I would love to for a minute.
Yes,
just helpful. What I see, right? What I've seen, particularly with small companies, is they spend an awful lot of time courting and developing relationships with what we call key opinion leaders, key scientists in the field. And that's very important, right? But working with a leader in a particular disease area who treats patients that doesn't have in-depth understanding of the regulatory environment won't really help you pull all your pieces together. So, you need to focus beyond just the key opinion leader, even very early in your development. Your funding sources will want to see those relationships, but that's not all that's important. And the other thing that I think I would do is, realize that you need to have access to either through consultants or, companies like mine and other CROs that have the drug development expertise, at least initially, to be able just to advise you on how all those things need to come together. I would not recommend and don't think you need to go out and hire a manufacturing expert, a regulatory expert, a statistician. You don't need all of that on your team at early stages. You need advice and expertise from, like I said, consultants or contract research organizations or whatever they have that can help you with that. In my mind anyway, and maybe Chris or Karina have a view, I think going too far into the depth of the expertise on that team is really at an early stage not a good use of your resources. So you're hiring people that maybe you don't quite need just yet. But I'd be interested to hear their comments as well.
Well, I just want to say that you don't need to alone with this, right? So most of you are coming from academic institutions or research institutions that have a plethora of resources to help you, and they're leveraging those resources across multiple projects, right? So I know that Temple has a Temple Ventures agreement with Ben Franklin. I know that Penn State has their entrepreneurs in residence. UPenn has their PCI Ventures, where they have those wraparound services. So if you need to talk to a regulatory consultant, they have those, on a short dial. If you need to understand the reimbursement, if you need to understand the strategy, I think finding the right entrepreneur who's been there and done that is crucial for the success, at least for getting the initial funding and moving it forward. So as you think about your research and how to commercialize it, I would emphasize that finding that right partner, the right CEO, is absolutely key. And then finding the right program within your university or research institution. I know Wistar has one, and Drexel has one, so you don't have to go far to find that support system. I also want to just plug in the Science Center, because QED program is designed just for that, right? It's designed to work with 22 participating universities to help you understand your reimbursement strategy, your regulatory strategy, your market size, and you work with mentors from the industry, and you put that pitch deck together. So that becomes your sort of first step in getting the needle towards commercialization. And then I would suggest just what Mark said, finding that right resource, the right entrepreneur to lead it would become the key.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Mark, and especially with what Karina just said. Your network is going to give you a lot of the answers that you need, at least to the extent that you need them, in the early days. And the stronger, the CEO you can find and pull on board, and finding a CEO, it's a bit iterative, because you being able to pitch them just like you would an investor helps to bring a strong executive on board. So having a good sense of what the business is and what it can be, and the benefits, market size, all those things are going to help you recruit a better executive, as is your network. A good example I was just referencing before this panel started with my panelists here. There's a company that we raised money for initially and helped place an executive with the company, former global head of pharma for Pfizer, Greg Germano, pulled him in to a nanoparticle company that's doing drug conjugates, and they haven't even hit clinical stage yet, and have raised well over $60 million. That's the exception. The market doesn't really do that. It doesn't typically raise that kind of capital for preclinical companies. The direction in the market has been pulling away from writing those sizable checks before first human trials for things like this. But on the back of a strong enough executive, the money is there. That's not necessarily going to be available for most of the executives that are reachable for companies in the early days. But it's an extreme example of how a strong leadership team or science team, people who've been there, done that before, who you can convince to join you on your mission, can be dramatically helpful to you, and they come with their own networks as well.
Yeah, and Chris, can I ask sort of your opinion? In my opinion, it's also really important to form a board early on, and then you can invite that leader to serve on your board. But the board then helps you control so many things, including that executive maybe that might be right or not right for the role. So I just saw so many times, very young companies struggle without the board. But when you assemble the right board with their own networks, their own connections, it makes all the difference. Can you sort of comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that ties in well with the discussion that we're having in terms of, not necessarily needing to fully hire a large team full time for you, because it's often not necessary. But you can often recruit up, recruit better than you might otherwise be able to afford or collect if you approach people with a lot of expertise, ask them to join your board. It's an easier ask of people, and maybe someday they do end up joining full time or take bigger roles in your company. But with that comes the obligation of being available to help nudge and guide and give feedback, and you'll always be on their mind for introductions, and it can get lonely when you're trying to build something that's small and fragile, and you get a lot of different noise versus signal when you're out there trying to build this company and develop your business plan. It's helpful to have some stability in people who do have some expertise that you can go consult and collect feedback from and ask for help. So maybe you can't recruit the former head of global pharma from Pfizer on day one. But if you were to get to know someone like that and ask them to be an advisor or be on your board, that's a much less dramatic ask. And then someday, maybe when you get to where you're hoping to get, or at the right time, and there's the right opportunity, they're already there. They're already interested. They already believe in what you're doing. Yeah, that's a strong approach for a large number of reasons, and it doesn't just have to obviously be an executive. There's the science or medical advisory board or people to help with funding or operations or CRO or whatever it is. The regulatory path. All those are important things that you don't need a full-time person, but you might need someone more than is otherwise available, and so that formalized relationship of having a board who's championing you and supporting you is extremely helpful on a number of fronts, not just for the company, but for you as a person trying to build this.
Could we talk for a moment about accountability to boards and to investors? I have sometimes heard from entrepreneurs that one of the reasons they want to spin out, they want to leave a company or an academic setting because they're tired of the expectations there. Can we talk a little bit, I open this up to any of you, about accountability to your board and your investors?
Chris, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I'm thinking through this. There's so many different ways of being accountable, and it can be a powerful thing. Having no responsibility to report anything to anyone, kind of allows you to stagnate, allows you to head down a path that may not be fruitful or building in the right direction down the road. No one likes to be graded. No one likes to receive negative feedback. No one likes to, be told that maybe that idea you had is perhaps not the right one to be pursuing. But it's going to be crucial if you're going to build something big, and if you want to stay likely on the right path, to have other people who can give you those that type of feedback, and that starts to extend as you have investors. The idea of timetables and timelines is a real thing. Being tired of academia and shifting into private enterprise, I guess be ready for a whole different type of tired, because it's going to feel like you're always struggling to catch up with where expectations are, whether it's from your board, whether it's from investors, whether it's from what you yourself had hoped for. But having the right investors, having the right board, people who can keep you accountable on timelines, on performance, on plans, on reporting, on making sure you're building the right infrastructure for your company. These are all things that are important to them, and for exactly the same reason it should be important to you. These things are all fundamental to the success of the company you're building, and ultimately to you as well. So having people outside have whether you think of them as buddies, like when you go swimming or at the gym, or whether you think of them as other professionals who you're accountable to, and maybe it's not such a tight chummy relationship, but they're on your side. They want you to be successful, and having someone that is going to hold you accountable to some extent is necessary for most people to get to where they're going and to do it in a somewhat expeditious way.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize, you cannot put enough importance on communication. Over communicating, I would recommend rather than under communicating, because your circumstances will change, the data might change, you will struggle through unforeseen circumstances. Board needs to know, and investors needs to know. They're there to help you, to pivot if necessary, and it's just, I've seen so many troubles just stemming from not communicating with your team and with your board, and I just want to emphasize that.
I think that touches on something else that's interesting is the concept of confidentiality. It's tempting for a lot of, or the natural instinct for, I think, a lot of people in the early stages is to hold things too close to the vest, whether it's your technology or even what you're doing in general, what you're trying to solve, how you're solving it. It's one thing to have a very very much a secret sauce and revealing the exact formula of how you construct the molecule or whatever it is. But beyond that, the more you share with your network and people you meet, and the more you talk about what you're trying to accomplish, odds are, the faster you'll get there. And that's really the crucial element, is how quickly can you move. There are a lot of people trying to build a lot of things. They're all distracted by what they're trying to do. Very unlikely that anyone cares enough about what you're trying to do in terms of the competitor side. To try to recreate it, invent it, and get there before you. Speed is important. Size of network is important. Don't be holding everything so close to the vest that you find yourself alone. Be open, be effusive, be excited about your opportunity, and speak that way. And that kind of thing is contagious. And you can't, give off that sense of excitement, and you can't pull people into your circle if you are not sharing with them. So yes, Karina's absolutely right. Err on the side of over communication, not just about your story and your technology, but what you're trying to accomplish, what you need.
So this might be a good time for me to ask the group to talk a little bit about intellectual property protection. So the flip side of that, right, is that we don't want to go out and say too much before we touch base with our technology transfer offices. And I think, Mark, you were about to comment on that.
I was on mute, but yes, go ahead. You're spot on. Or would you like me to comment briefly?
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, having spent years in not a purely academic setting, but at the NIH, where publication was really a key metric for us as well, just like at a university setting. Publishing your research, you need to be very careful about when and what you say with respect to your intellectual property protection, I think is the point. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I totally agree with Chris and Karina. You need to be out there talking to people. You need to utilize your network and the network of others, and they'll help you solve a lot of potential problems. But at the same time, you have to make sure that the core elements of your idea and your technology are protected before you put things in writing, in particular. Once you publish a paper, then it becomes part of the public record, and it can't be protected easily from an intellectual property point of view. And people that are looking to license your technology will be looking at how much runway, we used to call it, how much runway do you have left on your exclusivity in the market, right? That has to do with your patent protection. And so you really have to be careful about mostly what you publish before you get your patents filed and get your patents accepted.
And that's when your tech transfer.
Some of our friends, I'm sorry, please, Karina, go ahead.
I just want to say that's when your tech transfer officer becomes your best friend, because you really need to communicate that before you go and publish anything or speak on any conference. Please disclose to your tech transfer officer. Just want to plug it in here.
No, I'm glad that you did. And I was about to invite some of our technology transfer officers. If anyone would like to bring themselves onto the camera and contribute, please do. And while we do that, I'm going to lay out the last question. for you. We have about 4 minutes left here, and I wanted to ask our panelists for either an anecdote that you think maybe illustrates something important that our audience should hear, or perhaps just maybe a final thought that you would like to ensure that that we get in here before we close for the day. And why don't we go ahead and start with Karina?
Sure. Instead of anecdote, I just want to emphasize that there are plenty of resources that are available and for people to look at them. So you have, I mentioned program like QED, you have program like ICOR, I highly recommend both, but you also have program like IPART that helps you write successful grant. And while IPART is only available to Pennsylvania-based technologies, there's so many resources listed on their site that I recommend people go and look at it. And then look at the accelerator programs. We have a Digital Health Accelerator in Pennsylvania that's really great. We have Dream It, which invests maybe not into life sciences, but around life sciences and definitely medical device type of technologies. So I would highly recommend looking at accelerator that you can attach yourself. And again, look within your own institution. They have plenty of resources that can help you, from finding the right CEO to, as I said, finding the right expertise when you need it, and even helping you find funds and fundraising with you. So this would be my final thoughts.
Thank you. Chris, would you like to go next?
Just in terms of final thoughts, I just want to reiterate, it's going to be your network. There's a wealth of sources of early funding, and they take all sorts of different, shapes and sizes. I know groups that provide funding that specialize in providing, commercial and lab space for early stage companies that will also provide, dilutive sources of funding, but matching funding. To grants, to individuals, to professional sports players. We've raised capital from as part of other raises. Anyone and anyone and anything can point you towards a source of capital. So both funding and network tie in together there, and network ties into everything else you're going to try to accomplish. So Karina and Mark were right to point out there's nuance when it comes to how much you share and how you share it, and that's absolutely true. You don't want to give away the shop, but the more you put yourself out there, even if that doesn't come naturally to you, you'll find it gets even easier over time, and you'll be more fluid, and you'll receive interesting questions that you will not have thought of yourself, and you'll be ready to incorporate the next time. You'll get better and better at it, and more comfortable with it, and you'll find that the world starts to open up its doors to you. So never stop getting to meet more people, looking for opportunities to meet more people to make what you want to build come true.
Sure. And the last comment I'll just make, because I know we're like literally almost right out of time, is make sure that you understand where your idea plays in the marketplace and what it takes to get there. You don't want to be a solution looking for a problem. Particularly in life science, there should be a pretty clear unmet need that you should be targeting. Unlike the iPhone, which we all think about, we didn't know we needed it, and now we can't live without it. I think in life science, there's a lot of clearly defined unmet need for you to target, and I think it's more important for you to work towards using your technology to meet that unmet need.
Thank you. Before I let you go, panel, we do have one final question here. What general or key advantages of the company or technology do early investors look for in exchange for early adoption? I think that might be, how would you frame your technology such that you present to early adopters or early investors a compelling value proposition? Maybe some guidelines about how to go about that or ensure that your value proposition is sound?
I can jump in real quick, and it's tough because there are so many different areas, and the specifics change whether you're talking about one area of life science or another. But it comes down to understanding how big of an opportunity can this credibly be. to understand maybe the upside. And when I say that, that factors in market size and competition and all of that. How much risk someone is taking in order to take a shot at achieving that, and then also timeline, both from not just the time that you exit, but how long is it going to take for you to build this into a business that has value, whether it's something that is through phase 1 or 2 of clinical trials, where you can look and see, yeah, there are very nice 9-figure exits for certain types of companies that have gotten to that stage, or whether it's you're providing a life science service, and your customers, and that they already rent it, they already want what you have, and that you're going to have a viable business on day one. It's that interplay of how big of an opportunity, how long it's going to take you to get there, what's your journey going to look like in terms of timing and risk. All those things are kind of the key things that investors keep in mind, and everything within there is a framework. Development risk, commercialization risk, what's a credible exit opportunity, and how long is it going to take you to build something that has some value.
Yeah, that was a very comprehensive answer. Thank you, Chris.
Well, and thank you to all of our panelists. That fantastic content. We really appreciate your expertise. So on behalf of BioStrategy Partners and our audience, we are grateful for your participation today. And I'd also like to take just a moment to once again thank our sponsors, MBM Associates, Cesar Reviz, and University Place Associates. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and thank you again.